This is Jim Richardson, and I wanted to take an opportunity to reconnect with Toby Mathis as a follow-up to a meeting we did a few weeks back to dig a little deeper into some of the questions about and joining the NDL Founder Circle. So I wanted to take a minute and just remind you that Toby Mathis is a founding partner of Anderson Law Group out of Las Vegas. And Toby has been helping neurodiverse living on a couple different fronts. He's on our board of advisors, and Toby is also our personal attorney. So we do have a distinct separation there. And we wanted to get Toby back to give a little bit deeper dive on the 8 questions that we felt would best address what we've been asked by people coming off of our last webinar. So Toby, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. Do you have any opening comments before we jump right in?
No, let's just jump right on in. I love answering questions. We'll make sure that they get some clarity on these.
Okay, so question 1. First and foremost, can you describe what each of the categories are? We have a lessor, lender, and donor, what they mean, and what would a parent or family need to do to become one or more of them?
Yeah, so the easiest way to conceptualize this is that, kind of whatever hat you're wearing. And so if you're wearing a landlord hat and you're a lessor and you're leasing to the organization a property. So let's say I have a 5-bedroom property, great spot. And I do this personally. So I'm going to give you something I actually do. Okay. So I had a 5-bedroom property, Baltimore, a little bit larger than a typical rental. I was thinking of whether do I just sell it? Do I hold it? And lo and behold, an operator comes up who actually does exactly what you guys are doing, which was autistic adults, and they would have a caregiver living in the property on one floor. Then we had 2 bedrooms on another floor, 2 bedrooms on another floor.
Okay.
So that they were all separate. Perfect. 2-year lease, which is fairly common. You can go up to 5, but these folks wanted 2-year lease, a little bit over market rent because you're going to be having an operator there, right? You're leasing it to an organization as opposed to an individual. You're still going to have a guarantor on it, somebody from the company, but you're leasing it to a company who's an operator, right, just the same way you would lease it to neurodiverse living, right? And all you're doing is you're a landlord. Somebody else is going to handle that property from that point forward. If you need a property manager, you could, but I would say that in these circumstances, you probably don't need one, because if you just have your property, boom, you could just go to Jim and get the board to accept the lease. Everybody says is a good idea. And then you go about your merry way, just like you were leasing to anybody else.
Okay.
So that's number 1. So again, what's interesting here, we see this in residential assisted living, shared housing, not just autistic adults or veterans, single moms. We've seen incarcerated individuals moving that were nonviolent offenders. We'll actually have, in some cases, the counties paying for the facility. We've seen it all, but the whole idea is that you're taking a property that wouldn't normally be a rental property and you're making it into a rental property, because usually they're quite a bit larger. So again, 5-bedroom plus. Number 2 is just to be a lender. Say, hey, I'll loan you money because I don't know whether I want to make the donation just yet. So let's say that I am somebody who's sitting on some cash and I say, hey, I'll loan it to you and you can use this money. You're exempt from having to pay interest on it because it's a nonprofit. Unlike if I was to give Jim, for example, $100,000, here's a loan, I have to impute interest. Like the IRS will make us pay taxes though I received interest. That doesn't exist with the nonprofit. So you can literally just say, hey, use the money that was sitting in my savings account anyway, and then return it at some point in the future. And then at that point, you might convert it into a donation. So it's somebody who's sitting on some capital. Savings have never been higher in this country. And we know they're printing cash as fast as the machines will churn it out. Yep. So they're just saying, hey, you know what? I'd rather it be put to some use as opposed to sitting under my mattress or sitting in my savings account. So here you go, neurodiverse living. Here's a loan. Neurodiverse living would execute the note. And to the extent that there's any assets, you could always try to secure it. I don't think neurodiverse living is sitting on a whole bunch of money. But let's just say down the road someday there's a whole bunch of properties in it or something. Then you may be able to get it secured. Otherwise, chances are it's going to be an unsecured loan to the charity. And if it ever went bad, I'll just tell you, like I'm slippery slope guy, right? I have to tell you, For some reason they can't pay it back, then you'd treat it as a charitable deduction at that time.
Right.
The last one is just a flat out donor. You just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to donate money and I'm just going to give cash to the organization under the CARES Act and under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. Congress gave us a big loophole for this year, which is 100% deductibility against your adjusted gross income for charitable gifts. So if you want to give charitable gifts of cash, I should say. So that's round number one. It's like, if I just want to give cash, I can. What if I have appreciated stock? Let's say I bought a whole bunch of AMC and now it's, whatever it is today, runs up. I'm watching Reddit and it takes off, or maybe I did a bunch of Dogecoin or one of these crazy ones that just took off. Right. And I'm sitting on some big capital gains and I don't want to sell because I'm afraid of the capital gains. You could actually give that to neurodiverse living and take a deduction at your basis if it's within 1 year. But if it's after, if you've held this thing for longer than a year, you can write off fair market value. Now that's a big win, right? Because you paid, say I paid $10 for something that's worth $50 now, my deduction is worth $50.
Yeah.
There is a limitation on appreciated capital assets, which is 30% of your adjusted gross income, but you can certainly do that. Let's say you're sitting on a property. Some of you guys may have a property that's in your mind and you're going, do I want to be a lessor, or what if I just give you the property? The valuation for your deduction is the fair market value of that property on the date of the gift. So it's fantastic if you have highly appreciated real estate, because you get the fair market value, even if you've taken depreciation, so long as it's not accelerated depreciation. If you use one of the tax techniques to turn your property into personal property and real estate, then you have to be a little careful there. But otherwise, 100%, and it's the same situation as other capital assets, 30% deduction, but don't fret. If you use up your entire 30%, you get another 5 years of carry forward.
Great.
So me personally, I think that's one of the most underutilized areas of philanthropy, is when people have a house that they've had for 20 years, they've depreciated the heck out of it. If you're like me, I like buying in the Midwest. So I have properties that I paid $40,000 for that are now worth 120. I may give it away for the 120, so I'll just say, that's good for me. I get it much. My tax write-off will be about what I paid for it. And then now the organization gets the benefit of that property.
Yeah, and Toby, I think that's an interesting, one of the parents we talked to not too long ago had indicated that they wanted to leave the home to their son. And I would imagine that whether they're ready to do that now or in 2 years or 3 years, there probably could be a way that resident could live in that family home, and at that appropriate time, they could donate that to neurodiverse living, or they could put it in some other kind of document, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because when we think about property, most of the families we're talking to are going to be 60 years old or plus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many of them are in homes they've been in for a long time. Many probably own them outright. And I wonder if that's something that we should also make sure they know is an option for them and their child.
You could absolutely do that. And it's a little more complicated than just a donation.
Yeah.
You're going to have sometimes you'll have a directed gift. You'll say, hey, I'm going to give this, but it's subject to a life estate for my child.
Okay.
Now there's a IRS process for calculating the value of the life estate. So what your deduction would be for estate taxes, or if you did it early, like if you're living in the home and you just want to leave it as a gift, there's a way to do that. I would more than likely do that via living trust.
Okay.
And say, hey, you're going to get it subject to this life estate for this individual, your child. And you can always put a condition that, hey, that gift only happens so long as that child survives me. So, so that if something happens to the child, that you don't just give away a property unless you really feel compelled to do it.
Sure.
But you could absolutely still get the deduction based on the fair market value, and that fair market value could be calculated by its true fair market value minus the life estate value, which would give you, the calculation. And then when child passes, there's no longer a life estate that is subject to, and the organization would continue to use that property for its charitable purpose, which in this case is to house the adults with autism.
Yeah. Looks great. A lot of good options, and I think the level of detail that folks are looking for, and be glad to share this with them. Let's move on to question number 2.
Mhm.
What are the differences between the three, and would one be better depending upon the amount of support your child needs daily? So thinking about the three types we just talked about before, a lessor, a lender, or a donor, does one of those three have any potential benefit to a family depending upon their child?
I would say that they're all different flavors, but there's not one that I would put over the other.
Okay,
So for example, you're not really giving a gift if I'm just giving somebody access to my capital. You're just doing a great thing and allowing them to get a startup, but it's
right,
coming back. Like, so you didn't really lose anything other than perhaps a little interest
right,
if you missed out on that. So the loan isn't a big thing. The lessor, it doesn't matter whether you have a child or not. I like, I don't, I don't have an autistic child,
true.
but I have veterans housing, I have autistic housing, I have elder housing, I have, what's another interesting one? And I work with the United Way in Catholic Charities. If you know those programs,
Yeah,
quite often we have a lot of AIDS, individuals who are suffering from AIDS, which
okay,
is 40-year history, I believe is this year,
yeah, yeah,
but they can't be housed with other people. So you have to have one bedroom, one bath units, which just don't exist. So you're creating specialty housing for them at a price point that they can afford, which is really difficult these days. But all of those things don't require that I have a dog in the fight as far as
right,
having a real interest. So I can just profit as being a landlord, which is great. Neurodiverse living would pay fair market rent.
yeah,
If you feel like giving them the rent, you could do that, and that would be considered a charitable gift. It's just that easy. I got the rent, I paid it back, even if you waive it. The IRS looks at it as though they paid you and you paid them and gave them a contributions. It's that easy. And then the
yeah,
last one is just giving the money. I would say that's going to be your biggest benefit from a tax standpoint, because I get a dollar for dollar deduction. So if I'm sitting in a high income tax bracket, let's say that I'm over $500,000 in the state of Pennsylvania, I'm paying, soon to be probably around 45%,
mhm,
maybe more, $100,000 donation. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I get it. I'm going to save $45,000. So really the gift costs you about 55. You're getting almost a 2-for-1 under those circumstances, and you feel great. The other thing I would suggest to people, especially if you are, depending on your tax situation, but if you're somebody who's right on the cusp of getting of the standard deduction versus itemizing,
right,
then that donation becomes your friend if you do it periodically, like every third year instead of every year. So a
okay,
lot of people tithe and they give 10%. Say somebody's making $100,000 a year and they're tithing 10%. They're going to have a tough time beating the standard deduction.
right,
So they're not going to get a benefit from that gift. And so I tell those people, look, instead of giving $10,000 every year, why don't you give $30,000 every third year? That way, in that third year, you're going to get a big benefit. So there are some things we can do to help make sure that you're getting the most tax benefit out of it. Obviously, some people find that repugnant to be looking at the tax benefit. I say you may as well get some benefit from doing good,
yeah.
but that it's that third category where the taxes really sit.
Yeah, so it just sounds like there's a tremendous amount of flexibility here. And it probably just is whatever situation the individual happens to be in, there's probably a good number of options they can consider.
Regardless of your political affiliation, the tax code was written to encourage philanthropy. And if you're willing to do something that the government should be doing or could be doing, then there's rewards that are provided there. And don't ever forget that there's some really weird charities out there, including IKEA, yes, the furniture store, including things like just about every educational facility, but some really
Yeah,
cool ones like the Hershey, like in your backyard.
the
Go
Hershey
check
Foundation.
out, yeah, go up to Lancaster County and check out Hershey, all the things he did with no children.
Yeah,
He didn't have any kids.
yeah,
Things worth $13 billion
I
now.
know.
It just
It's a
keeps.
lot of chocolate.
Mhm.
That's great. Let's go to question 3. Back to the three different options. Tax implications, I think we've kind of touched on them. Is there one better than the other, or is that all going to depend upon the individual's situation at that time?
So just to reiterate this, I think that options 1 and 2, being a lessor or a lender, are really tax neutral. They're not
Okay,
going to give you, they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to help you, because if I'm getting the rents, I'm depreciating the house against the
right,
rent. I'm not going to pay tax on whatever money I'm getting paid. So I guess I get some free cash, right? Hey, I have my, like, it's good to be a landlord. Lending, neutral, no good, no bad. I'm going to get my money back.
Right.
I'm giving up a little bit of interest, but I'm doing something really great for an organization. The donation is where you get the big tax benefit.
Right.
That's the one where I'm just like, that's why people love to give money, especially when they're rich. You're making $1 million a year or more. I'm going to yell at you if you're not giving away a lot of it.
Got it. Donations are the way to go most of the time here. Good.
Mhm.
Question 4. If somebody wanted to become a lender, that specific version and that approach to working with us, are there any types of guarantees NDL would be required to provide to ensure the lender's money will be returned?
It's all up to you guys. So whenever you're looking for a guarantee, you're saying, is there anything that I can secure this with so that if you don't pay me, I can sell something or take it from you? So the classic example is a mortgage on a house. It's actually a note and a mortgage. There's a deed of trust or there's a security interest against the house that says, hey, if you don't pay me, I can sell your house. If there's no assets in neurodiverse living, then you're looking at it saying, wait a second, there's nothing here for me to get. So then so if you're somebody who's really a nervous Nelly, then they're talking to you, Jim, saying, Jim, what do you got? So
Right.
with neurodiverse living, I want to take some of your stuff, which again, most people in charities are going to say like, no, I'm not going to, we're all trying to do good here, but I don't want to lose my house over your loan to an organization that, I'm not in 100% control of. We have a lot of other folks. So,
But Toby, could we, neurodiverse living, if an individual, a parent, wanted to lend us $100,000 to purchase or acquire a property, could we not then tie that $100,000 if that was a loan? It was because that's the lender component,
I know where you're going
whether
with
it was
this.
interest-free or low interest,
You could,
and that money would get returned, or it could be converted to a donation at some point in the future, but it could also be tied to the property we're acquiring with that
correct.
loan, correct?
Yeah, you could secure it. So
Right.
sometimes the lenders are not too pleased about seconds.
Yep.
It's who's in first
First
position.
position.
Yeah, so they'll be like, oh, you have to come to the table with 80% down, or excuse me, with 20% down, we'll give you an 80% loan. In the for-profit realm, it's usually closer probably to 75, 70% that you're going to have that you'll be borrowing. So you'd have to come up with 20 or 30%. And they really don't like to see that being encumbered with the second, because the second could still force a foreclosure.
Sure.
And they don't want to go through that process. So, but yes, you could. And where I would see that really coming in is if somebody's willing to sell a property at a deep discount, like
Yep.
maybe they're going to do something well below market. You're getting a loan to help cover that. And then you say, hey, we need money to fix it up or whatever. Then yeah, go ahead and secure that. I don't see that being a problem.
Yeah, and I would also imagine, Toby, that if a family or an individual wanted to fund the entire acquisition cost, then there really wouldn't be a second. It would be just use that loan, if you would, to buy and renovate that property and secure it as the single lender.
They're no different than a bank at that point,
No
right?
different
So,
than a bank in that point.
yeah, and in the big banks, not so easy to deal with. You're almost always dealing with
Yep.
the community bank when you're dealing with a nonprofit. You can
Yep.
deal like I'm just say this, you're dealing with locals.
Yep. Okay. Question 5. Do any of these options allow for the parents to guarantee a spot for their child in an NDL home?
So the answer is yes. The big issue is, did I receive anything in return for my donation? That's the only one that I ever worry about. And they would have to say if there's an actual value. So the right to occupy the house probably wouldn't be assigned much of a value unless it was, you have the right to occupy for free. Then that would decrease the amount of your donation. If it's a landlord, no, you can negotiate whatever the heck you want. And if you're a lender, sure, you could put a condition on there. It's just you're not trying to get a tax deduction. So the only one where I get worried is when we give something in return for a donation. So for example, if I said, hey, I'll give my university a donation, but I want 50-yard line seats,
Yep.
it's University of Alabama, I'm going to have to reduce the value of my donation by the value of those seats because I received something in return. Or the best example the IRS ever gives is if you go to a silent auction And I know you do this, is like you're
Yep.
giving the 3-day vacation to
Yep.
Miami or whatever. If you paid $1,000 for it and its fair market value is 500, you get a donation for $1,000 minus 500. The
Right.
value that gets reduces your donation. So you'd get a $500 deduction because you got something in return for value. If it's impossible to calculate, then they don't care. But that's the best example I can give you. So I don't see a hard figure number
Right.
that you would say for having the right to be on there, but you just have to be careful if somebody starts asking for other gifts. So I don't see this having effect. And I remember we looked at it a while back and said, yeah, I just don't see it having an effect. But when somebody starts saying, hey, I wanted this and this and this and this, that could, if they're a donor, reduce the value.
Got it. Okay. Question 6. What type of giving? I think we're looking here is people have asked, is there a typical level or an average dollar amount that you've seen people give either as a lender, a lessor, or a donation? Could be any amount depending upon the person's financial situation and what they're trying to accomplish with a tax saving.
Yeah, so I've been involved in a number of money raises, and what I always kind of look at it is if you're going to give somebody like, hey, their name's going to be put on a T-shirt or something along those lines, $5,000 is about that threshold. What I see, if they're a giver and they're like they want to have some special relationship, it's usually 25,000, and those are just straight gifts. That's usually with universities. For example, I just did one with a rocket competition where sponsoring some kids that shouldn't even say they're kids, they're adults and they're wicked smart, but they're launching a rocket. So hey, your name gets put on the rocket as it goes up into the atmosphere.
Right.
So no real tangible value, that type of thing. If you're a lender, it just has to be worth it. So I mean, it could be $10,000. $1,000 probably not worth it, right?
Right.
You're just saying, hey, let me just give that to you. And then as a landlord, I would say it's the size of the home. I can't see this being effective on anything below a 4-bedroom.
Right. You're right.
And I would say probably 5 and 6 is going to be where you're going to have the entry level. So if you have a good size house, and again, I always find that, rental properties, to me, the way I calculate them, it almost never works if you have 5 or 6 or 7 bedrooms, right? Unless you take it into a shared living situation.
Right.
So you know who you are. You bought the house and it was a really great house and you thought it'd be a great rental. And then you're like, why am I always getting the snot kicked out of me? Because, like nobody really wants it. Every now and again there's a family, but boy, they don't want to pay what I think's the fair market rent on it. I mean, $1 million houses, you can rent them for $3,000.
Yep.
So it's, versus 3-bedroom, 2-bath, I'm still probably getting 2,000, right? It's not commiserate. And that might be a $250,000 house versus that extra 750 really didn't yield me much.
Right.
In this situation, it can. This is where we do see $1 million houses, 500,000, 750, the ones that you wish I hadn't purchased.
Yeah.
But this is the perfect place for them, is to go ahead and work with an operator. And you can have any arrangement you want. A lot of people just think I just want to lease it. But you can have a shared revenue agreement. I've seen that. I know we haven't ever talked about that, Jim, but I've seen that in residential assisted living where the landlord says, hey, I don't want just rent. I want to be like, we do this in shopping malls where they'll say, I want a percentage of your sales.
Right.
And so they'll say, hey, I'm going to customize this property for you, but I want to share in the revenue stream with the operator. And that's not out of the question either, especially if you have a large, expensive property in a great area. That's probably the only way you're going to get the rent to make it really worthwhile.
Right. Makes sense. And again, I think it goes back to there being a significant amount of flexibility depending upon the situation and how involved somebody wants to be working with NDL.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question 7, next to the last one. Can these 3 types of levels of founder circle, being a lender, a lessor, or a donor, be used in either co-housing as well as co-living? And let me just give you the quick NDL version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Toby, you've described a single family home, 4, 5, 6 bedroom, under one roof, single bedroom, 1 bath for each resident. And it's really like a single family home, co-living with other individuals that are of similar capability and and personality. And we have various levels of support for the residents of that co-living home. On the co-housing side, we typically think of co-housing where more of a larger development. There could be a couple individual properties together, some common community space. We're
Mhm.
looking at a property where it would be more of an apartment building type of environment, but there is co-living space, community space for people to come out of their units, watch TV together, play cards, cook, eat meals together. So that's somewhat the difference and distinction for us of co-housing. Tends to be bigger and it more is community style versus co-living, more in
Mhm.
kind of in a single family home type environment. So I think I know the answer, but can any of these three types be used for both of those models?
Of course, absolutely. There's no restriction whatsoever.
Okay,
And I know exactly what you're talking about. It doesn't, it literally doesn't matter.
right.
If I wanted to have three properties in a distinct area, I have an old manufactured home park. People call them mobile home parks
Yeah,
with about 30 units in it, and it's all veterans housing. So it doesn't matter. I'm still the landlord. It doesn't matter whether I have one, two, or three, or four, or 10. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is I decide to make this into a specific use
yep.
for a specific category of people. And then there's a common theme to it, but it doesn't really matter. And whether there's a
Okay.
lender, secure all the properties if I wanted to, secure the pad, secured the land, doesn't matter. And if I'm donating, by all means, I'm just excited to see the organization putting to good use the funds that I've been providing it. And a lot of people don't realize this. You can give gifts for very specific reasons. We can't do this with the government. Like when I write the treasury a check, I can't say, hey, use this for anything but, gain of function research, right? Sorry to
Yeah.
steal that out of the headlines, right? I can't put a restriction on it. They get my tax dollars. They can use it for whatever they like. In a nonprofit, I can say, no, you can
Yeah.
only use this.
For this a restricted gift versus unrestricted. Yeah.
100%. You got it.
Okay. Last question, and it really is, we've covered a lot of ground, but what didn't we ask that you think we would be good to cover in the closing minutes here?
Yeah, the only thing that I would say that you also want to emphasize is finding folks that need to be in one of these houses, in one of these residences. So there's nothing wrong with, hey, I don't have a house to rent. Hey, I don't have money to lend. Hey, I don't have this, but I do know somebody.
Yeah.
I would still bring that somebody and bring them to neurodiverse living and allow them to have an advocate, because I think that's critically important. So yeah. So yes, there are three things where there's an asset involved and there's money involved and possibly real estate involved. But that fourth thing is what this organization is really about, which is to
Yeah.
help those people that need that. And so I know everybody's already knows this, but I've worked with a lot of organizations, and sometimes we get very focused on fundraising and projects, and you never want to lose sight of that there's folks out there without a voice.
Yep.
And so let's go find those people too.
Toby, thank you very much. Appreciate the time, the clarity around our Founder Circle program and how folks can get involved. And I'm sure there'll be more questions, but definitely appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Always. Thank you.